Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're here live at the World Trade Center in Seattle. I'm here with Jim Makoso, founder of Lucid Oils. Jim is a cannabis extraction processing professional in the cannabis industry. In January 2015, he co-founded Lucid Lab Group, a cannabis extraction technology company based in Seattle. Jim's vision was to create a scientific approach to cannabis essential oil processing by utilizing customized capital equipment in combination with proven scientific processes. By taking a quality-centric approach, Jim has created a company culture known throughout the industry for quality in product and process. Prior to co-founding Lucid, Jim engaged Vuber Technologies as an angel investor in January of 2014. He joined the business management team, where he held the position of vice president responsible for strategic partnerships and business development until October of 2015. He remained on the board of directors until December of 2016, and by spearheading a business model focused on product development while maintaining a customer-first approach, Vuber has become a leading vaporizer company with strong partnerships that include manufacturers, cultivators, processors, and retailers throughout the U.S. Prior to his involvement in the cannabis industry, Jim was a finance professional in New York for 6 years. He holds an economics degree from Stony Brook University with a focus in business finance. Jim, thanks for being on board.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, right now the number one question when you walk into a rec shop or dispensary is what's the highest THC at the lowest price, or what's the highest THC within my budget. So that's kind of why it's not popular to have a top shelf product, is because people want to have something that's really, really cheap. And so, yeah, Colombia has the opportunity to be that big box store with the low labor costs and as much as they're producing. So it's going to be interesting taking a look at how Colombia rolls out. But I'm wondering about, we talked about different methods, how that impacts the product. And I'm wondering how these systems will be suitable for future extraction of other rare cannabinoids like the CBG and CBN and THCV, because CO2 typically produces a more flavorless extract that requires more refinement because it carries more chlorophyll, lipids, or wax, and undesirable compounds than hydrocarbon extraction. So light hydrocarbons are effective because they're strong nonpolar solvents that bind to the cannabinoid structure and terpene of the plant. Other solvents, such as ethanol, may bind to chlorophyll or cellular structure, which leaves a darker color and less desirable taste. Some systems are better at making particular products. So for example, hydrocarbon systems can make shatter fairly easily, while CO2 extractors typically utilize heat, which makes shatter production difficult. However, CO2 systems with cold separation technology are less likely to cause thermal degradation to the product. So there's a lot of options, but ultimately, will these options be suitable for future extraction of other rare cannabinoids?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think when it comes to extraction of rare cannabinoids, these processes are excellent for extracting cannabinoids. As it turns out, the plants that we grow right now are either really high in THC or really high in CBD, because over the last, call it 50 or 60 or 70 years, we've bred these plants to produce high THC. The plant naturally produced a higher amount of CBD, and we bred a lot of those plants out of existence, at least for a commercial application, because people wanted to get high. Now you're seeing people now breed more strains that have, even ratios, or strains that have less THC and more CBD. Some people are trying to breed strains that have no THC in it at all, which would have a huge amount of commercial viability for people who are doing hemp, really large hemp projects. But what I would say is, when it comes to extracting is just focused on extracting all compounds that have that similar structure. The cannabinoids all have a similar-ish structure. When it comes to, let's say, isolating individual compounds, you see that more in the post-processing or refinement stages of the extraction process. Extraction is just meant to separate cannabinoids and terpenes to a lesser extent from the biomass. Let's toss that biomass away. Now we have a concentrate. Mid-50s, mid-60s in potency for people who are mediocre, and for people who are really good at the extraction process, they're extracting 80 in the 80 percentile total cannabinoids plus other things, terpenes, flavonoids, esters, alcohols, etc. Then what people like my group has always done from the beginning is try to separate even further. Now, this is where you'll see a divergence from people who are like, all right, I want holistic extracts, and I want everything in there, so just give me that extract and that's what I want. But there are people who want a refined product. let's say some edible manufacturers, they don't want to taste any cannabis in their product, and they want to work with something that's easy to work with. So distillate became a very popular input material for some edible manufacturers. Not all, but I would say many. So there's another step of removing out now, as you mentioned in the CO2 process, fats, lipids, waxes, hydrocarbons to a lesser extent. You get some of these compounds. The colder you get, as it turns out, the less water-soluble chlorophyll, fats, lipids you get in the extraction process. But then there is another step, filtering out and then distilling the oil such that you're only pulling over things in a specific boiling point range, or in our case, cannabinoids. So now you have a cannabinoid matrix with no terpenes, no lipids, no fats, no heavier plant waxes, just cannabinoids. And so that's a refined product. Now, some people are taking it one step even further. And in the case of the hemp industry, what we're seeing now is isolate be popular. Now, we've seen isolate from a price standpoint come back substantially, CBD isolate, which is that white powdery, looks almost like drugs. It looks like a drug. And if you ever had a bunch of it and you got pulled over by the cops or something like that, you'd have a big problem because it looks like it's just a clean white powder, and it looks like it could be any white powder out there. Sure, you can use your imagination, but that's another process, crystallization of CBD, to produce as close to pharmaceutical grade purity extract as possible, which is just one compound. In that case, you're just going after the CBD molecule that's been decarboxylated, that produces a crystalline lattice structure and gives you that white powder. So there's a number of methods to get to, let's say, an isolate or an isolated compound like CBD or an isolated compound like THCA. There are similar methods for separating out other components of the plant that are not CBD or THCA. For instance, you mentioned a few, CBG, cannabigerol, which is kind of the cannabinoid that is the first cannabinoid that all the other cannabinoids kind of are produced out of, or when you change them, when you have enzymes interact with the CBG molecule, you get these other molecules, THCA being one of them, CBD being another. But there are other compounds, degradation compounds. For instance, you mentioned CBN. CBN, the plant does not produce CBN. CBN is a degradation compound where when THC or CBD is exposed to light or oxygen, will eventually turn into CBN, which if you've ever smoked really old weed, usually it has some CBN, and that's why you get the couch lock every time. I've never smoked old weed and not got couch lock. I try not to smoke old weed anymore, but every now and then, that's all you got is something that you found because you're, in Washington, you have less of that problem out here, but, you get the idea. But there are people already that are starting to use these refinement techniques to isolate individual cannabinoids like CBG, like CBN, like THCV, which is great appetite suppressant. And the plants produce these compounds, maybe in smaller amounts, but they're produced. And there are people who are going out of their way to figure out ways to identify that and isolate them. Because at some point, people are going to realize there's a lot more cannabinoids in this plant than just CBD and THC that have fantastic benefits. Another one cannabinoid that we're real interested in that we've started producing kind of as a mistake when we first started 4 years ago doing distillate was CBC, cannabichromene, which is showing in some white papers and in some really small examples, not with humans, that it seems to have some efficacy in neurogenesis. So it could be great for neurodegenerative disorders like Huntington's disease or Alzheimer's. Yeah, absolutely. So we're just scratching the surface. Companies that, as you mentioned before, are not thinking about just money. We got to, I'm a capitalist. So we got into this business to make money. But more than that, we got into this business to do cool things that no one has ever done before and to provide alternatives to just the standard Western medicine solution for things like, for real ailments like Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease or post-traumatic stress. All of these types of ailments, there are compounds in this plant, which is so unique, that have shown could be a good modulator or could be a good solution to try as a different form of treatment. And so as we develop more and more ways to isolate these compounds, I think you're going to see research institutions and medical institutions start to get a hold of some of these compounds and start to not only do in vitro or in vivo trials, but start doing human trials, clinical trials with clinicians behind it using these compounds found in our plant. So that stuff's exciting. And I think the groups that are focused on that type of work, not only will they, get the headlines, but I think there's a financial reward way, way off in the distance if they just focus on doing good work now.
So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. I want to thank my guest, Jim Makoso with Lucid Oils. Check him out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.